Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to our session on building anti-racism in Quaker circles. My name is Jonathan Betzall. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an Ashkenazi Jewish descent, and I attend University Monthly Meeting, which is on Duwamish lands known as Seattle, Washington. We now have 4 people join us. I don't, Rosie, were you at last year's session?
No, you
Okay,
mean at yearly meeting?
no, at this presentation last year.
Can't remember.
Okay. All right, so since the other 2 you said you weren't either, I'm going to very quickly review what we did last year. But first, let me introduce the entire process. This presentation is brought to you by the uh, Working Group on Addressing Harm with Care of North Pacific Yearly Meeting. This is different from the Anti-Racism Working Group, so this will have a little different focus. Today's session will have a little different focus than the Anti-Racism Working Group would present, even though I'm on both of them. What the Working Group on Addressing Harm with Care, known as the CARE, used to be called the CARE Committee, now it's the CARE Working Group. Our focus is on addressing harm with care. We were strictly focused on racism the first year or 2 and realized that there was a lot of other harm that also needed to be addressed. So we're also addressing several other issues. Let's see, people with disabilities, people with
Neurodiversity.
neurodiversity, yes, thank you, and LGBTQ plus people as well. So there will be other sessions like this one addressing harms that may occur with them.
Because your headphones, I won't be able to hear them.
Okay, just a minute. I have to adjust sound. Now, can you hear me? Okay, thanks. So first, let me read you my little spiel, and then we'll jump into the rest of the presentation. Okay. North Pacific Yearly Meeting set up this working group to help meetings and individual friends build more welcoming communities by openly addressing the social patterns that drive away people who differ in various ways from what's considered normal. We provide workshops and resources for study and reflection to help friends disrupt those patterns within themselves as well as within our gatherings. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss the content of the resources that the working group has made available and explore its application to the life of meetings, worship groups, and North Pacific Yearly Meeting as a whole. But before going into those resources, I'd like to tell you a little story from my own experience. In 1970, I worked as a community organizer intern in the Northwest Philadelphia neighborhood called Germantown. This is the same place where the first Quaker remonstrance against slavery took place. One of my mentors was Rudy Tolbert, a fierce advocate for racial justice in housing. His fiery denunciation of whites as racist led me to ask him, if I'm not doing those things, how can you say that all white people are racist? He responded, if the shoe fits, wear it. My eyelids flew open and I reeled back in shock. I suddenly realized that he was denouncing the actions of a system of which we are all part, not cursing individuals who are part of it. Quoting an analysis of the autobiography of Malcolm X, members of an oppressed group condemning their oppressors as a whole doesn't mean they hate or scorn every individual member of that group. They're simply expressing righteous anger and pointing out systemic oppression in society as a whole. This eventually led me to some strategies outlined by Tema Okun. Avoid taking accusations of racism or collusion in racism personally. Avoid defending yourself. Learn to say, tell me more. Understand your racism or your collusion in racism as conditioning, not as who you essentially are. Understand that awareness of your conditioning is necessary if you are going to change and grow. Now, the focus we took last year was very closely on what I call microaggressions. Have you heard the term microaggressions before? Have an idea what it is? Okay, then I have a little video I'm not going to show you because I think you're already familiar with the term. Basically, it's death by a thousand cuts. And if you know what that means, you imagine in a racial context, that's what microaggressions are all about. So I'm going to skip that whole part and we'll talk about how to apply that analysis I just very briefly outlined in the context of Quaker organizations. So the most helpful place I've found for resources for this is the Friends General Conference. And here is their, sorry, let me share this. Friends General Conference has a Ministry on Racism. This is their webpage. This talks about what they do. They are FGC, to their great credit, has incorporated this initiative centrally into their organization. In fact, since 2016, they have used an anti-racism query to guide decision-making across the whole organization. How does this decision support FGC in its goal to transform into an actively anti-racist faith community? So this is what they do. They advise FGC leadership. They support an institutional assessment on racism, which is a formal process where they analyze themselves. This took a couple of years and went into every single activity they did, and they found a lot of things they wanted to change, and they're now engaged in changing them. Training staff and volunteers to recognize and interrupt racism in FGC spaces. Develop resources that help meetings and yearly meetings do their own anti-racism work and connect FGC with broader movements for racial justice in the Quaker world and beyond. And so here, there's a page where they talk about their journey to doing that. They carry out their work in collaboration with several committees, and these are the committees that they work with. There's a particular committee called Ministry on Racism, but then there are these other ones. And this is the one I'm actually going to focus on, Addressing Racial Wounding Committee. But let me just show you the other ones. Ongoing Online Events Committee. This does a lot of online events, including an online meeting for worship that focuses specifically on Friends of Color. And this every single week they have this meeting for worship, and a lot of people who don't attend any other meeting for worship will come to that one. Then there's that Institutional Assessment Implementation Committee. I mentioned the institutional assessment. This is the committee that oversees how that's being implemented. So the Ministry on Racism program welcomes Friends of Color, friends from communities at the margins, such as those who are Indigenous, immigrants, refugees, 2S, LGBTQ+, disabled, or from low-income backgrounds, and white presenting friends who want to learn how to address racism and other forms of oppression and support social justice. Then they have these programs and events, several ways to get involved. They have worship and fellowship spaces, both for Friends of Color and from Friends of Communities at the Margins, to connect and support one another. They have retreats for people of color. They have workshops and trainings, and support to attend related conferences and training, including the yearly White Privilege Conference, which is put on workshops by the Center for the Study of White American Culture and Experience with Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. And then they also provide scholarships for people to attend not only FGC events, but also the White Privilege Conference. Have a question?
What is Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing?
Okay, we'll take a quick look at it. There they are. This is a non-faith-based organization, but they go out and help people do the kinds of training that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
This makes sense. And then they have staff. Okay, and they're based in California. Okay. They also help local Quaker groups, and they give examples of the anti-racism query in action. How is our money being allocated? Because that shows where an organization's real priorities are, who gets hired and nominated to committees, their programming, and making their own policy changes. So FGC will help meetings reorganize themselves as they feel led. And then they invite volunteers, so you can contact their team to do that. Now, the focus I'd like to take today is this Addressing Racial Wounding Committee. This is the actual focus of the working group on addressing harm with care. And so I have this website right here. They issued these guidelines for addressing racial wounding. And the first thing on it is a racial wounding reporting form. And we will take a look at that. But first, I want to talk about what's behind the form, and then we'll go into what's actually on it. The Addressing Racial Wounding Committee provides support to friends who've experienced racial wounding at an FGC-affiliated event. It's part of the Ministry on Racism program, and the guidelines below describe how the committee supports friends and holds FGC accountable. And since its formation, they've received and provided for support for 24 reports of racial wounding at FGC-affiliated events. I think this program is like 3 or 4 years old. So that gives you an idea of the scope of what they're experiencing. What is racial wounding? Can everyone read this? Is it big enough? Okay.
I'll be back in a minute.
So they're basically addressing 3 categories of racial wounding: harm and diminishment that's directly to a person of color, exclusion and erasure, where you just have them not there, or if they are there, deny that they're there. And this includes dictating the appropriateness of a person of color's emotional response. This is also known as tone policing. Like, for example, you shouldn't be so angry about that. And then boundary violations. The appropriation of other people's cultures comes under this one. Disrespecting the boundaries, non-consensual entitlement to people of color's time, attention, emotional labor, bodies, or spaces. You may be able to think of examples of this. Just because a person is a person of color, they might get called upon to represent their whole group at some presentation and probably not get paid for it. Okay. And in some cases, not even asked whether they would like to do this, just put on the spot. And then white people entering POC only spaces where their presence is not appropriate. So the committee addresses these, focusing on 4 priorities: healing and restoration, shaping collaboration with the person who experienced harm. The committee prioritizes impact over intent while honoring the dignity and humanity of all involved. So this is not like an attorney-client relationship where they're acting as a warrior on behalf of somebody, but it really is bringing everyone together. Deepening relationships among friends and strengthening our community. And we can talk a little bit about what that might mean. Accountability and amends when desired by the person who experienced harm. The committee offers tools that honor the dignity and humanity of all involved. And finally, organizational accountability, holding FGC responsible for anything that happened at its events. This might take the form of saying, what could we do better next time to prevent such an occurrence from happening again? The core principles. It's a little bit repetitious, but I think it needs to be. Friends will be heard and believed. Impact matters more than intent. Collaboration shapes the path forward.
Wait.
Dignity and humanity guide the process. Relationship comes first. Consensual communication is key. And confidentiality matters. And then here's some possible remedies for racial wounding. Being heard and held with worship by a support circle. Documentation of the incident. Being heard by the person who caused harm without that person's reply. An invitation for the person who caused harm to offer an apology. Recommendations for policy changes that may prevent similar harm in the future. An invitation for the person who caused harm to participate in an accountability process. And in situations when other approaches have not resolved the concern, a request is made for the person who caused harm to leave the FGC event. So this is how they actually move on this. They address racial wounding at both the individual and structural levels. Some cases involve harm between individuals, but others reveal the need for structural changes. So they might be working with their individual friends. They might be passing the word on to like governing committees or planning groups. And then the rest of this is their own documentation and transparency. And then they tell you who's on the committee and who is their staff. So now I'd like to share with you the racial wounding reporting form so you can see how this actually would proceed in action. I have a suggestion to ask for questions or comments before sharing the form. So anyone have any questions or comments at this point? Let me go ahead and see the form.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let the form. It's at the top. There. Okay. Here's the form. Now this is really small. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Does that look bigger?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here they're describing the form. We recognize that racial harm has caused many people of color to leave the Religious Society of Friends and has made spaces unsafe for many friends of color who remain in the Religious Society of Friends. In reporting and tracking the harm that occurs, we hope to respond to, take accountability for, and prevent racial wounding in order to become an actively anti-racist faith community. And then they talk some more about how it's done. They're giving credit to where they got a lot of the approach. But you can see they're telling people they're telling people what to expect. And they're emphasizing certain points. This may look familiar. You may share as much or as little as you feel comfortable. You will not be required to disclose any information. And you can see how that differs from a police report.
Mhm.
Okay, nod when you've read this page, and I'll move on down the form. Okay. Okay. Okay.
5. I didn't get.
Yeah, these points should look familiar. They're,
They were up above.
points they made earlier about what they're doing.
Mhm.
But the impressive thing for me is just how carefully they set things up for people to fit well into the process. Okay, now the questions. Your contact information, who caused the wounding, where did it happen? And then this box, I believe this box will open up as you type into it, so you have enough time to, or enough space to tell the whole story. So the emphasis here is on safety. Now, they don't actually say who's on the Addressing Racial Wounding Committee. So I presume anybody using this questionnaire would have to distribute that list so they would know who they were talking about. But then there's an opportunity to name a potential support person that the person themselves names. So there's no worry about, is this person acceptable? They named them themselves. And then what would you like to have happen next? This is pretty similar to that list that we saw earlier. And I presume the person could just like cut and paste out of this if they wanted to. And here you see if the person is willing to say what they think the organization could have done better than this last one. And then you click submit and off it goes. And then as they said, the committee will take up any forms that they've received and process them. They'll contact the person. They'll perhaps set up processes for people to meet if they need to, for committees to be notified, information to be shared, and they may ask other committees to do other things. So I'm sharing this because I want us to think about how we could do something maybe not as involved as this, but having the same basis, the same kind of orientation, and some of the same methods in our own situations. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. And let's go on ahead. So first of all, do you see the need for such a process in any of our Quaker spaces?
Yeah, I think there's a big need for it. Um, I would like to see events like yearly meeting, have support groups set up, affinity groups set up, and have one of the affinity groups be the group for people of privilege, and sort of build that into the culture that, you know, when you need support, you come to this group rather than burdening people of color, burdening marginalized people with your feelings. Um, I'm not sure how we get to that point because really have we haven't really even gone down that path at all. But uh, I think the reason that we are struggling so much in terms of diversifying our community is because that doesn't exist.
So I heard you saying that there needs to be a space for people with privilege to come to recognize that privilege and potentially act on it. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. The people of privilege affinity group would serve a different purpose than affinity groups for people that are, or you know, marginalized people.
Right.
It would serve some of the same purposes, but also very different purposes.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, the if I've learned nothing else in this work, I've learned that you know one where the problem gets tricky is you have well-intentioned people. Everybody's well-intentioned in this process, but then when it actually gets down to working on it, people of privilege end up, you know, being putting a burden of people, marginalized people, to explain everything to them, to walk them through it, and that just adds to the problem.
Yeah. Right.
So by having a person of privilege group, that's where you can get your support. That's where you can talk about these ideas and come to understand, or at least attempt to understand things. I guess a good example is I was at the FCNL annual meeting about 3, 4 years ago, and there was a panel talking about these issues, racial justice issues within the organization. And there was three people on the panel. One of them was an African American woman who's Assistant General Secretary of
Mhm.
FCNL, and there was a question to the panel of something about, you know, what's been hardest for you in dealing with this work, and her response was when um, when Quaker process is weaponized against marginalized people. Well, I didn't understand that, right?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was like, that's very interesting, but that seems like that's key for me to understand what she's saying there.
Mhm.
Well, normally I'd go and ask her, I said, what do you mean by that? Right?
Right. Right.
But I had already done enough of this work to realize, no, I can't go ask her, you know? So I asked several of or one of the groups I'm involved with at Salmon Bay meeting. We had a book group at the time,
Mhm.
and reading that book, Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship.
Mhm.
And so I presented that question to that group, and we kind of talked it all through, speculating, you know, what might have been meant by that. And I think I have an understand. Maybe I don't understand exactly what she meant by it, but I think I have an understanding, and I didn't burden her with it.
Sure.
If we had that structure set up in our yearly meetings, that you could always go to your uh, white privilege accountability group to discuss these issues, that would help that process in terms of not burdening marginalized people.
Hmm.
Wow.
Hmm. Yeah. I see people nodding.
Mhm.
Well, thanks, Tom. Any other comments on that or anything else?
I'm I I really appreciate what Tom said. I haven't been particularly involved in NPYM, but at the NPYM level, if we had something in place like this, I think that would be of benefit. At at the monthly meeting level, I do feel like we're struggling just with those among privilege, conversations like that
Mhm.
Tom referenced.
Right.
Um, which isn't to say we don't have any people of color whatsoever, but it doesn't, that's not, I guess, where I see conflicts happening.
Hmm.
I see conflicts happening. I mean, part of the reason I'm here is just like things are up between myself and I identify as white and other folks who identify as white
Mhm.
around our anti-racism work. And I guess I thought it was interesting that the harm looked like on the FGC core principles that it was targeted against people of color. So I didn't see any, and maybe I'm wrong, Jonathan, you can tell me. Like, so for just to tell a really quick story, we had visitors, a mother and daughter, come to our meeting because they were actually, one of them was going to play music afterwards. So not typical meeting attenders. Um, a friend stood up and spoke about the humanity of a murderer around a murder that happened locally where a young Black man was shot and killed. Um, and that was taken really hard by our visitors. That was taken as an act of racism, an act of racial violence. The visitors were white also. Um, and I don't think our meeting responded very well. Basically, they just sort of left, enraged. So I guess that's a question. That's like, was that an incident of racial wounding that could have gone through this process?
Yeah, I see your point. That, it didn't seem to be people of color who were harmed directly, but um, other people who heard it, they felt harmed.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question. Where would that go? And it happened with, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and even if it was a spirit-led message, it can still harm.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
Right. And let's say if they had been people of color, I mean, part of the interpretation was, well, these are non-Quakers who don't understand that we're going to hold the humanity of the victim and the murderer both because of our Quaker religious beliefs.
Mhm.
So goodness sake, I cannot imagine going to a person of color who had had that experience and saying like, well, you don't understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Well, thank you for that thought-provoking example. It deserves more than an immediate response.
Hmm.
But you're right, too. It is the kind of thing that these, the kind of queries that this information brings up and can cause us to think about locally. Okay. Yeah.
I really like your idea, Tom, about, you know, a group for white privileged people to talk about this, in more detail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to maybe tell the kind of stories that I told about being woken up.
Right.
That was literally my awakening.
Mhm.
Other people can get something out of that. And, just on reflecting on it, that would enable them to consider some pretty thoroughgoing questions.
Yeah, I think everybody sharing their stories is valuable for everybody.
Mhm.
Mhm. And it in itself builds community
Yeah.
because we've had this experience together. Okay. All right. I want to share one resource that I've come across that FGC actually makes available. It's called the White Privilege Conference.
Hmm.
Have any of you ever dealt with that?
I've heard about it.
Okay. Um, it was
We've been there.
organized by a person of color, but it's mostly white sociologists who come to it. And FGC actually makes scholarships available for Quakers to attend, any kind of Quaker. So you don't have to, your meeting doesn't have to be affiliated with FGC at all. And this year it's coming to Seattle next month.
Oh, wow.
April.
C-Tech.
CTEC, actually, yeah. April 22nd through 25th.
When quarterly meeting is?
Yeah.
Whoops.
That's
Well,
the third event I have that weekend.
Yeah.
no. Okay, but I am going to it.
Oh,
Just,
good.
We're trying to decide if we're taking the grandkids again, like for the third time in a row, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
And if John isn't going,
well, we'll figure out how to split it. But anyway, it is a wonderful resource, and as I say, FGC, the registration cost is $350 unless you're in certain categories. But they give you a $100 scholarship if you're a Quaker.
Oh.
You just go to FGC, do kind of a pre-application, and then sign up for the White Privilege Conference. I just did that this morning. It was super easy. And what happens there is it's a lot of kind of semi-scholarly reports, discussions, and they really put into practice the support group / caucus idea, and really make it work. I went several years ago. It's been like 10 years ago now, the last time they were in Seattle, and it was remarkable, the kind of results they achieved with that.
Yeah.
Also, just to let folks know, at NPYM, our what was then called the CARE Committee, now the CARE Working Group, does organize affinity groups. Those 4 affinity groups. But we will now consider that one for people. Actually, maybe the Anti-Racism Working Group should consider the one for people of privilege. But since I'm on that too, that will definitely be reported.
All right.
Yeah. So we also have listeners whose job it is to listen to individuals who may feel harmed, and then just all they do is they listen and they report. There's no other action promised. We've done this for, I think this will be our 4th year, and it's been pretty good. We've not had a lot of incidents to deal with. We've had 1 or 2 and maybe 3 each time. But there will be a few more people who just want to be listened to, and that helps them, to the extent that they want.
Who are not dealing with a certain thing
Right.
that had been suggested.
Yeah.
Are listeners often chosen by race?
I'm sorry, say again?
Are listeners chosen by race? I'm imagining that it could be a really powerful experience to have a white listener when you're talking about racial harm, or it could be really scary.
Yeah. Well, we don't have any people of color in our listeners group. No. Sorry, sometimes we do. Sometimes we have one. But mostly it is white people. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. A white person might feel judged, but the expectation that we hold up for the listeners is that they will not do any kind of judgment at all. It's simple listening. We've not had any complaints about it. No one said anything other than, the listeners have done what we asked them to. But thank you. Yeah, that is a good point.
So there are other groups at yearly meeting that are focused on LGBTQ, sorry, and other.
Right, they're affinity groups.
Yeah, okay.
And they have various LGBTQ plus. One in particular, we focused a lot of attention on making sure they were safely housed and had a meeting place that was, very easy to access, because we were in Montana last time and people felt pretty scared. As far as I know, we didn't have to actually deal with any incidents, but we were ready. This time, the next 2 years, we're going to be in Olympia, which is a whole different atmosphere. but you still have to be ready.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rochelle, for bringing us to your monthly meeting level.
Hmm.
Any other considerations at either monthly or quarterly meeting as well as annual session? My own thought was to kind of be more active and asking the kind of overall question that FGC asked was, how does this action push us forward as a anti-racist organization? Just getting our meeting to adopt that idea, would be a process.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Go ahead.
Question out of complete ignorance. Has NPYM set a goal of becoming an anti-racist organization?
Yes, we adopted a minute to that end in 2019, and we've been kind of working on that ever since. The anti-racism working group was formed at that time as an implementation of that minute. So it's never been an actual committee, although we've now been kind of subsumed under peace and social concerns, although we think of ourselves as broader than that. But that's the institutional structures under peace and social concerns, but addressing the whole yearly meeting.
Great start.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. There are individual friends around the yearly meeting who are doing things. The committee was supposed to support monthly meetings and taking action as well, but there's really been very little at the monthly meeting level. So, but that's a whole other conversation. We want to focus on kind of the healing process and the reducing harm in this discussion, and then anti-racism working group will be having other discussions on taking anti-racist action. Sorry to kind of steer things that way, but that's kind of our process.
I have to go, but it was great being here. Okay. Go off.
Okay.
Does it feel like, Jonathan, that with the current political environment, that any of this work needs to shift?
Would you please say more about what you're thinking?
There are three of us here, and I had this feeling that, like, if ICE had been in the title, perhaps there would be more. And that's connected, right? It's strongly connected.
Sure.
So I think a lot of anti-racism work is being done now by folks who are, protecting their immigrant neighbors. And that's where a lot of emotion and attention is.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
That's all. It's really a question. It's not an intuition that anything needs to change. And I'm a firm believer that in justice movements, you've got sort of splashy, fireworks work that gets attention. And at the same time, you've got the steady foundation. We're doing the same thing year after year and setting a foundation for change. And that it's that combination is really what's successful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I agree with your analysis. I sometimes describe roles of priest and prophet.
Mm, mm,
Prophets are the ones who,
mm,
bring up the issues, and priests are the ones who have to try to make the organization do things.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely right. You can see both roles going on at the same time.
mm.
A lot of the commentators on events in Minnesota have pointed out all the organizing work for decades that went on to build these communities so that they'd be able to resist ICE as they have, and and with uh, and taking lessons from that, and applying those lessons locally. I was going to say that in the ICE struggle, I see that this is anti-racism on the ground happening, but
Mhm.
you already said that, so I think everyone has that idea quite clearly. Um, for people who live where there are not a lot of people who might be targeted by ICE, um, this is an eye opener. The whole thing is an eye opener. It's and will perhaps lead them to consider these deeper questions, like the one FGC poses in every single decision. How does this decision move us forward in our anti-racism work? We might not think of that in our budgeting. We might not think of that in our routine operations. But if we did, what would happen? Can you see that happening in your meeting? What do they look like? Okay, let's just sit with that question. Speak as led. Well, I want to thank both of you for showing up today, because you each brought up something for us to consider and work on in the future. Tom's idea of essentially an affinity group for people of privilege to deal with, their emotional and psychic, spiritual situation. And Rochelle, with your idea of how is this playing out in the world today, um, brought me to think, what would happen if our meeting took seriously that question that FGC poses to itself?
Mhm.
So that's actually going to be my next move at University Friends, is to see, would meeting adopt the practice of asking these questions of ourselves, and just see what happens. Be really interesting.
Yeah, it brings up for me also like what other sort of minutes has my monthly meeting um written over the years that we're committed to
Mhm.
it's good to bring up those goals repeatedly instead of minuting them and then moving on.
Right. Well, if you do find any, Peace and Social Concerns Committee wants to know, because some of the, with the meeting's permission, those can be put on the yearly meeting website. There already are some. There's one from South Mountain meeting. Oh, isn't that your meeting?
That's my meeting, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's probably our land acknowledgement that
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, any final thoughts? Should we do this again next year?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, very good. Well, it's great to see both of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I have recorded this so people will be seeing it, and we'll be in
Excellent.
touch again soon.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, great. Take
Thanks,
care.
Rochelle.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay.